Welcome back to the Steve Beaman Show, where we make sense of the future before it happens. Now, is AI going to be a dysfunctional future for us? Does it create, destroy, or is it just a moot thing when it comes to job creation? Well, I've written about the 10-10-10 economy in the past, and today we're going to unpack the 10-10 economy and the impact of AI on your job and your future. So, welcome to this episode of the Steve Beaman Show. I had somebody recently that I was talking to, and they said, Steve, is AI going to replace all of our jobs? Well, I looked at them and I said, well, I hope it replaces most of them. I don't really like cutting the grass or doing the laundry or cooking the food. Can AI help with robotics and all the other things replace some of that? You bet you, it sure can. And that's an optimistic view of what technology will bring us to give us freedom to do the things that we most care about. But here's a theory that I want you to consider with me today. I've written about this for, 15 years now, and I've called it the 10-10-10 economy. It's an economy in which 10% of the people own assets, 10% of the people innovate on those assets, and 10% of the people, well, they're used to operate those assets. The other 70%, they're just not needed for basic production. Now, that can be taken as a utopian view of life, or where extreme freedom allows people to do what they want, or it could be seen as a very dystopian view, where tyranny and control become the mantra of the day. Well, I want to look at that today with you because this theory of mine has been showing itself to become more true over time. Let me give you a little history of it. First, this whole idea of the 10-10 economy started about 15 years ago when I began looking, just scourging the computer and just looking for ideas. And I saw something called Second Life. Absolutely fascinated me. This is a two-dimensional sim model where you create an avatar to represent yourself and you go into this world where you can be anything you want to be. Cat, a dog, a person, a child, and whatever. And you go in and you have a community of people, all of whom are doing the same thing. And they have nightclubs, they have bars, they have retail shops where people buy nicer clothing or nicer avatars. It's a self-contained virtual world, thus the name Second Life. Now, what really got me about this is when I read about what are called Second Life cafes. These are places mostly in Europe where people would go in and they would get there in the morning and log into their Second Life account and they would completely live their lives in Second Life. Now, Second Life had something called the Linden, which was their token, so you could earn income in Second Life, and people literally just lived it. Well, as I looked at that and I thought, my gosh, the world of this virtual world is coming to life. I looked at it with regard then to blockchain and the developing blockchain technology of the late 2000s. That and what it generated, called Bitcoin, started making me really ponder what the future would be. In 1980, I wrote a book called Computers Made Simple, and I laid out what the world looked like in the year 2000. I nailed it on the head with that. I described working at home and the computers at home. I described the markets and how they traded with technology. So this wasn't new to me. But when I saw it in 2010, it really began to hit my mind that this is the beginning of a transition into what I thought of as the post-industrial capitalism. In industrial capitalism, you have a model that says capital, money, matters because we need it to build plants and equipment. And the cost of building things for distribution and communications are very expensive. I started to see a world in which that capital no longer was the value proposition, but ideas were. That we could use technology to develop the ideas we had at very low cost. Witness what is now developed as 3D printing or today's AI. These kinds of developments into the technology age for real lead us down this thought that I had that the world will become a 10-10-10 economy. 10% owners, 10% innovators, and 10% operators. That's not a hugely different model than we've had. It's just been some percent owners, some percent innovators, and a big percent of operators, 60, 70%. I'm just suggesting in my mind that gets cut way down. An example of that, if we look through manufacturing people are so much more productive today. One person today is producing what 10 or 15 people did 10 years ago. They're using robotics and technology to enhance their jobs. So fewer people are needed to do that basic job, but the job that's there is a higher level job. Now we're seeing that play out for productivity good. We also see it for some questionable stuff. In California, for example, they raised the minimum wage to $20 or $25, whatever that ridiculous thing was. And I'll get into why I think that's ridiculous, but they raised it to a point where the small businesses, especially the restaurant owners, said, we're just going to automate. So we're seeing restaurants in California now that have no employees. They're just automated. They're robots that take your order at the drive-in window. It's robotics that create the food and deliver the food back to the delivery window. This is all possible today. The question is this AI robotics-driven world that we're headed toward going to create a positive utopian post-scarcity society with extreme freedom? Or is it going to create a dystopian world of tyranny? Ray Bradbury, 1984, Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, that type of world. Well, we're going to unpack that more and more today as we go. But I want you to keep in the front of your mind this idea of the 10-10-10 economy and where that goes. Now, there's a lot of history about the transitional economies we've been through. Let me start with the story, and you can, Google these stories all over the place. But there was a group called the Luddites in early 1800s England. These were people who were textile workers who worked on looms, and they began to see their jobs being automated out. Well, as a result of that, there were riots and strikes and all kinds of bad, things. Violence became a result of that because they didn't want to adopt to a new world. Now, if you take that a little bit forward into the United States through the Industrial Revolution, you had 70 or 80% of the agricultural workers in the United States migrate into the industrial economy. That's a really significant number, and that's transitional. When you talk about 70 to 80% coming into a new economy, that's a huge change in those people's self-identity. It's a change in how they operate, how they live their lives, and that happened over a period of about 100 years. What we're looking at today is a thing that I've seen changing over a lifetime, 40, 50, 60 years, or 20, 25 years. These are massive changes happening at the speed of light. In fact, I've talked often about this idea that if you go back to 1700 and you look at the world in 1700 and then the world in 1799, you see a world that, yes, we saw the creation of the United States of America and the idea of a constitutional republic. That was unique. But we basically had the same functional lifestyle at the beginning of the century as the end of the century. You got food the same, you transported the same way, you communicated the same way. There wasn't a lot of change. From 1800 to 1900, you have the Industrial Revolution. You have the growing network of railroad for transportation. You have the wireless or the wired Morse code stuff, the telegraph. So we had technologies that changed, but it wasn't the kind of acceleration we see today. Again, it took 100 years for minor change. The 20th century, from 1900 to 1999, my goodness, we saw the imposition of radio, television, airplanes, jets, rockets, computers, microcomputers. I mean, go down the list of invention that happened, telephones. The 20th century saw things change at an accelerating pace. The world of 1900 was very different than the world of 1999. Now, as we enter the 21st century, the world of 2000 to today is vastly different already. It's not 100 years, it's 25 years. Think about it. At the beginning of the century, we didn't have cell phones. Computers were still dial-up modems. There was no real internet distribution throughout the world. We've now seen over the last 25 years the bringing on board of social media, cell phone technology, all of these cellular networks now around the world, Skylink or Starlink. So we have global satellite systems that can now give internet to people. This is a huge change. And unlike the Industrial Revolution that dislocated people or relocated them from agriculture to industry, this time around, it's happening at the speed of light. The world today is very different than it was 10 years ago, let alone 25. And that's an accelerating curve that will continue. So it is crystal clear that technology, and when I say that, I include AI, the blockchain, tokenization, robotics, machine learning, all of those things together, those create a world that is transitioning into a new era of economics in a fast way. I've wondered kind of what you call it. Is it the post-industrial capitalism? Is it, what's a good word for it? And what I've come up with is the idea that it's idea capitalism, where ideas make the difference. Because you can take your idea at very low cost and produce it and distribute it and get the word out. This is a really positive thing for technology. It's a very real thing for the entrepreneurial spirit, for the people who say, I want to live life on my terms. I want that individual freedom to do it my way. Technology can create that extreme freedom. And that's the utopian side as we go down and say, what's the good that this can do? Now, I went to they call them swap meets out in California. It's a flea market recently. And in that flea market, you have probably 100 little vendors. They each make their own products. Some of them made soap, some of them made baked goods, some of them made wood products. There are people there that are selling things of their own creation. This microeconomy, which is representative, again, of extreme freedom, is the utopian vision of the technology change, where people can create their own businesses, create their own lives, and live them on their terms. We're going to talk in a minute about the dysfunctional side or the dystopian view too. But on the optimistic side, the utopian view of extreme freedom, some of you won't like that I'm even going to refer to these, but I'm going to, because I do follow the World Economic Forum. That's the Klaus Schwab group, and the Bilderberg Society. That's the people, the super rich who get together. In the last years, what they've been talking about is a post-scarcity economy. Now, the post-scarcity economy derives from the idea that we can have machines creating our basic needs. There's no cost to those basic needs. Well, that creates a whole different model for you and me. If it is true that technology does the operations of all these things so that you own or innovate and the technology operates, that can free you up for a great deal of things. And I can give you some examples of that. Take an accountant. An accountant says, I fear AI. I fear what it can do because now people can go on and do their tax returns for no cost. Well, that may be not good for that accountant, or they could look at it on another level and say, wait a minute, if I can offload the menial tasks to the computer, I can spend my time counseling and consulting with my clients to bring more value to them. Your productivity goes way up. If you're a law firm and you're a single operator today, you can use AI to do legal research far greater than you could have hired associates in the old days. I mean, if you look around the world, and let's take the example of, say, you have a woman in Nairobi, Kenya, who says, I want to be a consultant. I want to be an educator. I have these ideas. I want to get them out. 20 years ago, that was an impossible dream. She had neither the people or the distribution systems in place to allow her to go out and do that. Well, today, it's relatively simple. She can go out and, using AI as an assistant, do the research she needs, construct the text she needs. She can write the books she needs, and she can distribute it through social media and the other technologies in an instant at no cost. That is the utopian side of this technology. It's absolutely wonderful. It empowers us as individuals to do what we want to do with our lives. And that's exciting. And that is the post-scarcity utopian view of technology. it's clear that this stuff can happen. To give you another example, I read a book about 12 years ago, and it had to do with the blockchain, and it was talking about case uses of blockchain. And I read about a group in India, and it was 10 farmers or so, and they could not individually afford a combine to do their harvesting. So they created what now we call a DAO, a distributed autonomous operation. And that DAO, through blockchain technology and smart contracts, purchased a combine, which they could now allocate usage of it to each other through smart contracts in the blockchain. That is a perfectly freedom, individualistic way to use technology. It's not socialism. It's not the community bought it. It's perfect capitalism, because each individual gets the benefit of this product without having to own it individually. It worked beautifully. And that type of thing, using these new ideas, is able to generate, again, a very strongly individualistic future. And this is, again, I say it's a utopian thing, but as AI takes over these menial tasks, and it frees humans, it frees you and me to do higher pursuits. Again, I'm going to, in a minute, talk about the dystopian side, right? And there are things there that you can say are very not cool. I've talked about this at length in speeches. Within 10 years, give or take, I don't think we're going to need truck drivers as they are today. There's 6 million of them. Well, what do you do with them? What do we do with 6 million people? You can't be flippant and say, well, go be coders. No, the computers now program themselves. We don't need coders. But I would argue that this has that dystopian view of an unnecessary person, and as a coincidental part, a utopian view of a higher value job. Instead of the truck drivers being physical drivers of that vehicle, I see a world in which a truck driver is more like an airline pilot or a rocket ship captain. They're directing the truck's systems and monitoring the truck's systems to make sure all is well and good and safe. It's still a truck driver, but not in the way we think of a truck driver. Now, the interesting part of that, if you go down kind of the logic of it, is there a reason that that person has to be in the seat of the truck? No, they could do it from their home. The technology and communications capabilities will exist such that we can control remote vehicles. We do that now. If you look at drone attacks going on in the Middle East from the military, the operators of those drones are usually in the United States. It's a remote control. Well, we're getting to a point in communications and technology where truck drivers will be able to control their trucks remotely, but they'll still be the one in control of it. Again, like an airline pilot. Is this a dysfunctional releasing of 6 million jobs, or is it a utopian restructuring a job to be higher value? Both are true. Both are true, and it depends how you empower yourself and look to the future with your knowledge and understanding on how you'll make this work. Another good example of this, I was talking to a person who they edited manuscripts. They're like a copywriter. And we were talking about it, and we were talking about AI and how it's affected them. And when this person was running their copyright business and first saw the implementation of the large language models like ChatGPT, they said, oh my gosh, this is going to put me out of business. Well, instead of being afraid of it and running from it and giving up, what they did is said, how can I use this for betterment of my business operations? Well, instead of throwing in the towel, they created a full book publishing company because they realized they could use AI to do the menial labor. They could spend higher times meeting with customers, consulting with them on how to build their brands, and doing those things that are higher value, not the menial tasks. That's the good side of technology. Again, I welcome a robot to do my lawn. I don't want to do it. So as we look to it, we can say there is this very individual freedom, very positive side, very really strong sense of an individualistic positive outcome. But I would argue on the other side, and it's equally as possible, is this notion of a dystopian future, of a tyrannical future. Again, we talked in another podcast about the idea of the Fed coin, about the idea of government control and social controls like they do in China with the social score. The dystopian side of the growth of technology starts to bring that to bear. I mean, imagine in the world in 2030 that you're going out to fly to see your children. They live in California, you live in Atlanta. And you go to the airport to buy your ticket, or you go online to buy your ticket, and it says, I'm sorry, your coins aren't worth enough. You can't buy that ticket. And you say, but wait a minute, I have the same amount of coins as the guy next to me, and he just bought a ticket. The computer says, well, I'm sorry, your social score is lower. Your coins aren't as valued as highly as his. And your social score is based on what you've posted online, all of the stuff that the Chinese score looks at. That's a dysfunctional dystopian world. And that gets into the Ray Bradbury 1984, again, the Aldous Huxley Brave New World. Look, you have a world in which information is given to the tyranny of government, and that information is then used against you. That's the downside of this technology, not to mention the jobs it could take. So if we say that you can be like the truck driver, you can be empowered to become captain of that vessel, or you can just say we're just unemployed. If you have 6 million drivers today, maybe you end up with only 1 million under the new model. So those 5 million become what? Wards of the state? This Andrew Yang, you saw him running for president, came up with this idea, and I don't think it's his, but he took it and ran with it, of a universal basic income. His thinking is simply this: if we migrate to this 10-10-10 economy, and instead of having 70% of the people operating assets, we only have 10% because the other is done by computers. In that world, does it make sense to have a universal basic income for that 70% so that they have food, water, shelter, clothing, medical care, basic needs met? I understand the push people have for that. I tend to be a little worried about it because as we take away someone's this idea, when you meet somebody and you first meet them, you say, what do you do? We're trained culturally into what do you do? We identify with our jobs. Again, if your last name is Smith, you grew up in a family years ago that was a blacksmith. Our very names are based on the jobs that we held. So go into this world of the UBI. When you meet someone, the what do you do, the self-identity of that individual is critically important to be concerned about. I'm going to digress a bit, but in the United States, we went through in 1965 the imposition of the Great Society programs. The goal that Lyndon Johnson set out and said, look, we're the richest country in the world. We're not going to have poor people. We're going to allocate money from the wealthy to the not wealthy. We're going to make sure they have food, clothing, shelter, and medical care. So we created Medicaid and we created these entitlement programs. When it first happened, people said, wait a minute, you're telling me that I get a monthly stipend so that I can pay my rent, I can eat my food, and I get to go to Medicaid, I get to go to a doctor. People said, great. People aren't stupid. They respond to stimuli. So people rationally, especially those at that time were unemployed or living in the poverty, said, I'll take that. It's a UBI. I'm happy. Then government came in and said, oh, wait a minute. We feel more sorry for you if you're divorced, because if you're married and there's a father taking care of the financial side, they're not as bad off as a single mom. So what happened? Again, people are smart. They respond to stimulus. People looked and said, well, then I'll get divorced. If you'll pay me more for that, I'll do that. And then to throw fuel on the fire, they came in and said to those single moms, the more kids you have, the more money you're going to get. So we had a situation in which a UBI, that was thrown in. It wasn't called that, but that's kind of what it was. It came in and destroyed the culture of the inner cities because people had no way to get out of that. In the city of Chicago, and this statistic's a little old, but it used to be that it costs $35,000 of private sector income to offset the benefits that somebody could get on the social welfare system, if you want to call that the UBI. So people could never jump from the UBI social welfare system into the private sector because there's no way to get there. If you say this job starts at $20,000 and you work your way up, they're never going to give up $35,000 in benefit to go work for $20,000. It's not going to happen. So this idea of an entry-level job started to wash away. I think in Hawaii, it was like a $50,000 thing, by the way. It's not the people's fault. They responded to the stimulus given to them by government. It goes back in a prior podcast. I used an episode of two guys walking down the street. One of them has 10 loaves of bread because he's worked his heart out for a year and he now has 10 loaves of bread. Another guy walks up and he's kind of partied for the year and doesn't have anything. So he says to the guy, look, I want a loaf of bread. The guy with it can do one of two things. He can say yes, in which case he's generous and the other person's thankful, or he can say no, in which case he can be considered selfish and the other person's going to get mad and say, well, I better not do that again. I'll go hungry. Now throw into those two people the third person who rides up on a white horse with a sword. And he looks at this situation. He says, that's not fair. You have 10. He has none. I want you to give him one of your loaves. The guy says, well, no, I'm not giving it up. He says, then my sword will go on your head. He says, okay, I'll give the guy a loaf of bread. Now what's happened? The person who gave up the loaf of bread feels stolen from. The person who got the bread feels entitled. And the other person on the white horse rides off saying, look, what I solved the problem. I'm the hero of the day. They're not the hero. All they did is create unrest in those two. They split them up, where now they're adversaries. That's what typically goes on in the government system. And that's the downside of the UBI that Andrew Yang talked about. We create a system in which the government says to those 30% who are gainfully employed, you will pay for these 70%. Now, maybe there's no other choice. But I tend to like the idea of those 70% take this as an individual freedom and say, we're going to use this to exploit our own talents and our own goals and desires to achieve our own opportunities. And I think you could do some of that today. I think we can look at the people that are embroiled in these entitlement systems today, give them access to this technology and really a little bit of training. It wouldn't take much, but give them access to the technology. I'm willing to bet you they're every bit smart enough to create their own stuff to get out of that situation. Technology must become a liberating force. Otherwise, it becomes a tyrannical force. And the reason I want to talk about it with you is I'm on this podcast because I have kids I worry about. I have grandchildren I worry about. And I believe our country is in a really bad way. We don't feel it, but we are. We've talked about the debt, the deficits, the trade deficits, the poverty levels, the unemployment levels, the employment levels, which we measure that differently than unemployment levels. The number of gainfully employed as a percentage it's much lower than it's been historically because we're getting into that 10-10-10 economy, and it's happening fast. And in the next 10 years, you're going to see it come very much into the mainstream. So the question is, how do we respond to it? Do we take a utopian view where it's liberating and it gives extreme freedom to people to build their own products, their own ideas, and use this idea economy to the individual's benefit? Or does it become dystopian where it's a tool of control by the state because we've given up our liberties to the state? I think that choice is yours and mine. But I think in order to make a good outcome of it, we have to talk about it. I welcome the dialogues we get. I'm not here to say I know everything, but I hope I know enough to generate a dialogue with you. I believe I go back to Josie Wales and the outlaw Josie Wales when he meets 10 bears toward the end of the show and they're going to kill each other. But he starts to argue why they shouldn't. And he looks at 10 bears and he says, with governments, you don't always get an equal shake. Governments don't get along, people do. And I am convinced that people with this new technology can solve these problems. I'll talk in a minute about the issues of blockchain and politics because I think that's fascinating. But if we look at this as a group of individuals on a global scale, there's no saying a person in Nairobi can't take this technology and run with it, or Vietnam, or anywhere. If governments give the freedom to people to use this technology and use their own skills, I have faith that the individual will take care of their own problems. I really do. I believe in the individual. It's why I love small business so much. I love entrepreneurs. I think they're all that's good. I think they represent the best of everything. Now, we also know that a lot of ideas aren't good. So what? You still go down the path of trying. You throw it out there. If it's not a good idea, it's not. And you recover and you rebuild and you start over. Technology gives us the unique ability to do that without a lot of cost and without a lot of wasted effort. Technology can do the rudimentary work. But if we don't control it and we don't personally learn how to manage it, we give it up to the experts, it can become a tool of tyranny real fast. I don't think you want that, and I certainly don't want it. So we have this issue that in looking at AI and the 10-10-10 economy, the solution to it is to make it a positive thing. And that's because we learn knowledge is good. Knowledge always has been, is now, and forever will be power. And so if you and I can help educate one another and build that knowledge, then we will have the individual power over the government. And that's the goal. Perfect individual freedom can come from this. And let me touch on that real quick. Because if you look again at history, we see governments abusing technology for the benefit of the power set. I believe this can be used for us. When this whole thing started, and I'm working with Deny Media Group, and there are a couple of people who I met who I have a lot of respect for, and they met with me out east. We were at a press tour, and we started talking about global government. And the group that we were with traveling was very opposite of that. They're very not global government, very, let's keep it small, let's keep it clean. I get that. I just historically think it's impossible for us not to have some kind of global government. I think it's just real. I mean, we started off with families. We then bounded families together in neighborhoods. We bounded neighborhoods together in cities, cities together to make states, states together to make countries, countries together to make continents. I mean, we've kind of upward aggregated forever. The next aggregation is to the world. I get it. But here's where I can get a positive feeling for that. The problem you and I have with politics, it's certainly the politicians, because the hypocrisy, the stupidity, and the self-serving nature of a lot of these people is wildly offensive. But we also know that tied to that is an electoral system that's corrupted. I don't know about you, but I don't believe that all of the elections are fair. I don't believe they're equally accounted for. I'm not a denier of elections. I think generally speaking, they're probably okay. But I know in some, it's not. I believe strongly that blockchain and smart contracts can fix that. I think if we create a blockchain voting system, you can be guaranteed that every individual gets a vote. No individual gets more than one vote. I think you can control that. And if we can do that and ensure fair elections, and we open up this kind of technology to ensure actual dialogue with these people, maybe we can have a system where we elect people who aren't stupid, who aren't corrupt, who aren't self-serving. That makes this technology incredibly useful for us in governing this thing, because it does get governed. I just want it to be governed based on what we want. I believe it's power to the people at the nth degree. I believe in the individual. I don't believe in the collective. I think the collective tends to make decisions that are inefficient and wrong. I think individuals make decisions in their own self-interest, which in aggregate creates a system of efficient operations. Is it always right? Clearly not. I've made mistakes in my life that are massive. But in aggregate, we learn from those mistakes as individuals, where collective groups tend not to learn from mistakes quite as well. So I think this idea of blockchain-based voting, I think this idea of a control over the political body by us, I think that can be part of this utopian vision where technology and AI become liberating, not controlling. I think we can keep it out of the other side of dystopia by knowing about it, learning about it, and learning to make it part of us, partner with us. Don't look at it as a threat, because if we look at it in fear, it will take over. And to me, that's a dystopian world I don't want to face. I don't want it for my kids. I don't want it for me. So as we continue to think about things, I want to touch for a minute on the military, because in history, when you have these kinds of economic transitions it's almost always led to warfare. Most, if not all, wars are money. At the core, they're based on economics. Some country needs more money, so it has to attack somebody. This country wants money back, so it attacks a country. It's almost all money. In this country, the Civil War that we had was very truly born of two things: the desire on the northern part to get rid of slavery as an institution, and that's real. That was a motivating factor, but it didn't drive it to begin with. What drove it is the industrial capitalization of the North versus the agricultural capitalization of the South. The South knew that if the North outlawed slavery, its economy would collapse because it wasn't industrialized. That's the cause of that war. World War I, same thing. World War II, same thing. All these wars are economic. The point is, at the world transition we're in now, we're set up for war. However, there's one differentiating factor, and that's called thermonuclear weapons. I equate these with AI from this standpoint. If you go back to 1945, when we invented and proved the hypothesis that you could create a bomb out of nuclear forces, that was oh my God, we've let the cat out of the bag, the genie out of the bottle. How do you put this back? And the fact is, you can't. You can't uninvent things. We created this monster, but we've pretty well controlled it. Since 1945, there's never been a nuclear bomb used in warfare. Why? Because we've created the doctrine of mutually assured destruction. And if you don't think between the US, Russia, and China, there is a conscious thought about if I attack, they attack, and we're all gone. There absolutely is. So that technology, yes, it's potentially devastating, but it's led to a world with almost 100 years without a global war. Now, there have been countless micro wars, whether it's Vietnam, Korea, Ukraine today, Bosnia. We've had a ton of these micro wars, which are used by these bigger powers to play chess. I get it. People die. But we've not had anything on the scale of World War I or World War II since the invention of the nuclear bomb. I think AI is a similar thing. AI it's created, it's out of the bag. I don't care if you look at it and hate it. You can think it's the most immoral, unethical thing in the world. You're not going to put it back. We have it. It's invented. It's out. It's just going to get more powerful. And from a geopolitical standpoint, you don't think the countries know this? We're going to see a massive wealth disparity in the world if there isn't adequate human control over these things, because those countries with will have more. Those countries without will just be left behind. Now, I tend to think it's a positive there that we'll be able to use technology to bring up those without to participate in what we think of as middle-class standards. That's a good thing. The bad side is governments, again, tend to want to get in trouble. And they're going to be using AI to create warfare that's like nothing we've ever seen. Instead of bombing a city, they're going to go after its financial infrastructure, its healthcare infrastructure, its information infrastructure. That's a real concern. And you trust, trust's a funny word when it comes to government. I don't know, I'll digress. You guys know who Edward Snowden is, right? Well, I remember watching the movie about Ed Snowden. I've read a couple of books about it. It's shocking to me how much he knew that this goes back 15 years ago, the government was doing to spy on its people. Well, that's 15 years ago. The technology is a lot better today. So do I trust government to use it appropriately? Nah, not really. Do I hope they're using it to not allow others to really come and attack us? Yeah, I do that. I think none of us can relate with how bad it would be to have the kind of electrical grid problem that just took the grid down. Everything you do is electric. You're watching me today on a phone or a PC or some kind of technology that requires electricity. Cars now do, right? Your home, all of its lights are electric. We're very laid out there for an attack on the electric grid. So I hope that the powers that be are watching the AI stuff so that we don't get bugs in our AI or our electric grid. I don't want to see that. And I know you don't. But It's there. We can't say, well, let's uninvent it. No, it's already there. We have to stay ahead of that curve. It's why I do, as an American, I like bringing semiconductor chip manufacturing back to the United States. I like bringing supercomputers back to the United States. I like bringing technology back to the United States because I live here. And I think if we can partner with Western Europe and partner with, much more of the country, everybody's going to win. But I think I'm digressing a little bit from today, but you have to recognize China's not now and never has been or never will be our friend. They are our competitor, and they're in it for China alone. They talk about a global view, and it's because that, in their word, is good for China. It's only good if it's done on their terms. I think the Western world needs to respond by having powerful technology development, powerful technology infrastructure, and using this AI-based technology for the good of the people. If we're going to see a world in which factories operate without people in them, I've told the story many times about the factory I went through in Indiana. This is years and years ago when I worked for an econometric firm. It had no people, no lights on in the place. It just created product. That was a shot across the bow to me to say, look where we're headed. I look to a world not too far out where when you call for Uber Eats, there's no driver in the car. I see a world in the next not many years where people don't own cars. Instead, they create DAOs. They create these distributed autonomous organizations to run one car between them. And they just call it up when they need it. Most cars just sit idly in a garage anyway. Why not use them full time? So the technology of AI is changing the way we work. It's changing the way we get things. It's moving us potentially into this post-scarcity society, which that can be a really good thing if you and I choose to use the freedom that gives us to productive ends. Again, if the identity of a person is found often in what they do, what do you do when people aren't needed? That's a real big question. Again, the purpose of this podcast today is to raise a lot of questions in you. And I hope we have active dialogues that go on because AI can be the destroyer of worlds. And I've had people comment that AI is going to destroy our lives. It could if we let it. But I tell you, there is an optimistic side to this, a utopian side in which extreme freedom generated by these technologies leads to a golden age of humanity like we've never seen. I think it could be a new renaissance. I think we run the risk of the dystopian side too. And I'm hoping, it's going to be somewhere in the middle ultimately, but I hope it tilts toward the utopian side of freedom, 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 freedom. Because in this world of technology-driven economics, extreme freedom is the only way to make it work for everybody. Raise kids to understand technology is their friend, but they have to have critical thinking skills to know what to tell technology to do. I mean, I touched on this earlier that we don't have to any longer program computers. If you go to ChatGPT, and that is a very rudimentary large language model comparatively. I mean, it's very advanced today, but it's the tip of the iceberg. But if you say to that, I want Python code generated to do this, it'll generate the code for you. You don't need to learn Python. You don't need to learn C#. The system will program it for you. But the intelligence you need is to tell it what to do and how to tell what to do, where it fits in a bigger picture. That's very difficult. And that's where critical thinking skills come in. That's where the humanness of this comes in. We're a long way away from a sentient computer that can have episodic memory like we do. And you'll learn this. I urge you to sign on to ChatGPT and just learn it. It will talk to you. But what you'll learn quickly is it doesn't have real long-term memory. I'm 63 years old. I have 63 years worth of memories. Lord willing, I'll remember most of the stuff that happened. I also have episodic memory where I can remember a specific event and I can tie things to it. And I can learn lessons from that past. Technology, especially the large language models today, don't have that long-term memory. They might learn a week of you or 2 weeks of you, and you can tell it stories about your past. but it can't experience life with you along the way. Give that 10 years and it will. Every one of us will be able to write a memoir because the technology will just say, hey, time to write your memoir. Let's generate it. I think that's kind of exciting. I think that is, again, a renaissance of ideas and imagination. I think the terrorism of the tyranny side is real too. If we don't monitor this and we don't watch it, I believe this is a tool governments can use to just control us. Again, when you say control us, what do you mean? I think this Fed coin is real, and I think the government is going to have the ability in the not too distant future to monitor the value of your currency. I have a coin, you have a coin. They won't necessarily have the same value. If I adhere to the government's lines and you fight the government, yours will be of less value. Again, we see that in China today. Will it come to the Western world? I think it could. I don't want to, but it could. So we see this tyranny done by currency, but I would argue it's also information. We know that governments can tell flat lies to its people. There are countless examples where the U.S. government has lied to its citizens. And it's not unique to the U.S. Every country does it. But the point being, with the technology we have now, you can disseminate lies a lot faster. And I think it was Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, who said, if you tell a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. We stand in a situation with artificial intelligence where you can put out things on the internet. You can make any political leader you want say whatever you want. And unfortunately, because we're generally trusting people, we believe it. You see a picture of pick your candidate, if it's Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, and they're made to say things that are in direct contravention to what they stand for. It would look real. That's a real threat. That is a threat to democracy because truth matters. And that kind of manipulation through AI is really bad from the information age. That's one of those things that you have to say, ugh, I don't like that. Disseminating information is good. And we can debate ideas, but you have to trust that those ideas are genuine. So, as we look to the future of this and we look to explore where this is going to lead us, I think we have to say, A, we're headed toward the 10-10-10 economy. It's inevitable. Even if we bring manufacturing back to the United States, it's not going to look like the manufacturing of 100 years ago. Again, one person will do the job of 100 people on that old factory floor. It's not going to create the type of employment we think. It will create these high-level employment types, like the truck driver who sits as a captain of an airplane. It's going to change the nature of the jobs, but it's going to bring the production of the product back to its point of distribution, and that's efficient. So, again, I think we can look and say AI is going to affect employment. Absolutely. We're going to have less time consumed by menial labor. Absolutely. Is that bad or good? And that's totally up to you and me. It can be extreme freedom in a utopian way. It can be tyranny in a dystopian way. Another quick story. I told you I went to this flea market and you have all these 100 people doing their thing. What's really cool about it is people have created a frictionless or less friction economy. When you talk about these vendors at these shows, they're using Venmo, they're using these non-bank apps to transfer money back and forth. Well, there's no time delay, there's no cost. That's friction removement. As we move toward this digital economy through tokenization, through these other things, right now you have frequent flyer miles on airplanes. When those become fungible and you can transfer them to and from people, they become like a bartering currency. I think we'll see more of that coming in the near future. You'll see more tokenization of everything. And when you look and say, well, government has to regulate that. I'll just go down this path, going back to our history lesson. If we look and say, well, government, by its nature, government manages in the rearview mirror. It can't legislate that which hasn't yet happened. Right? Fair enough. So in the past, when government looked in the rearview mirror, things hadn't changed that much. So they could implement a law that would be impactful for another 20, 30 years. Now, because it's changing so fast. When government implements a law, it's on what was a year ago, which isn't even in place today. It's something totally new. And that's where it's going to change the dynamic of governance. It has to, and it will. But you and I need to stay at the forefront of that discussion, because intelligence and knowledge is power. I've said that before, and I want to say it 100 times. If we can build a community of people, you and I, who talk about these deeper issues and can wrestle with things like, what are alternatives to the UBI? If Andrew Yang wants to push that politically, what's an alternative to it? We talked on the tariff thing, and I'm just going to go back to a podcast I did. There were a lot of comments on tariffs, good and bad. Here's my point with that. I said it then, and I'll say it again today. What we don't need are people who just complain. Criticizing and complaining are easy. Everybody can say, you're an idiot, that doesn't work. Okay, what do you think does? This is hard. We have to come up with ways in which this technology can be used to bring us down the individual freedom and the wonderment of that enlightenment instead of the tyranny of control. It's why we need these dialogues. So as we go on that, I welcome you, by the way. Write me at questions@stevebeaman.com, and let's just talk about it. We're going to hopefully be doing these podcasts live coming up so that I can talk to you live every day, because I've devoted my life to this. I believe in technology. I believe that the Web 4 world, not Web 3, but the Web 4 world of an integration of all these technologies into one platform is going to change the way we live, work, and play. Believe that. I've dedicated everything I have to it. So I look forward to a time when we can talk live and we can have a dialogue looking towards solutions to the problems that we have, not just stay in the problems. They're idiots. I hear it in politics all the time. That person's an idiot. They don't know what they're doing. Okay, fine. Take a blank sheet of paper and you give me a solution. What's a better solution? That's what we have to talk about. We can start with hypotheses about this might be a good solution, but how do we do this? How do you and I do this together? And that's what this is all about. I appreciate your spending time with me today and talking about this 10-10-10 economy and AI and all that means. It ties in to a book I just finished on the coming digital economy. I think it's just critically important for us to know these issues, enlighten ourselves about them, train ourselves to them, and learn about them. And then build a dialogue between people who kind of have the same questions. See if we can't find solutions. But I appreciate your joining me today. I am excited to always communicate with you. I love doing this with you. I love the dialogues I'm getting into. I thank you so much for your time and consideration. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Steve Beaman Show.